"How are the new recruits doing, Cutter?" The big man was standing in Security Chief Ridley's office, watching the cameras and making note of the blind spots. Cutter had been a Marine in the sandbox long enough to cut most situations to the bone with a single observation. He hadn't been your average jarhead, one of those gung-ho rifle-toters who usually got wasted by an IED, or random bouts of gunfire from insurgents. No, Cutter was one of those guys with enough black ink on his file to make you lift your eyebrow. Brave Marker, a company that did not exist as far as anyone was concerned, was one of those units that came in with extreme prejudice and left bodies and destruction behind. Cutter couldn't tell you his body count before joining this little organization, but it had been double digits that were creeping closer to that fabled triple digit every time they gassed up the chopper. This post had helped him get there, but it also allowed him to practice his special brand of violence on people who could probably clip him from reality with nothing but a thought. Scare them young, and they would never step up to you again, just like cats did to puppies. Not so new anymore. You'll have some solid additions to the snatch team, probably some minders too. I hear that little bitch we picked up near Massachusetts is probably going to graduate. A couple of others are testing really well too, so we might be able to graduate a couple of them from this class. Ridley still had his back to the man, staring at the monitors as he watched his charges move about the compound. There were a few less. The 20 had become 18, but that was to be expected. Chandra had been the first, but the death of the blue band named Jax had been a bit of a surprise. The red bands sometimes killed each other in combat practice. The green bands often burned out due to mental strain, but the blue bands were often where you got most of your graduates and your washouts. Jax hadn't died in some accident. He hadn't been killed by a vindictive classmate, and it had actually been something far more commonplace. Jax had made no secret about the fact that he liked Choco Buddies, a candy bar they stocked in the vending machine. Apparently, the ones he ate at home had never been anything but chocolate and nougat, but the last batch they had gotten was a new kind, with peanuts instead of nougat. Jax hadn't been paying attention when he went for his mid-afternoon snack, and he had died of anaphylactic shock before anyone realized what had happened. That had been unfortunate, but 2 deaths in 6 months wasn't so bad. Sometimes the deaths reminded them that they were mortal, and that despite their powers, they could be killed, even by something as mundane as peanuts. "I see you getting close to Dex. Do you believe he'll work for us?" Cutter thought about it, his hands making a rough noise as they sawed across his 5 o'clock shadow, and nodded. "I think you will. Dex likes to help, and helping is something the Snatchers often like to pretend make their pursuits noble. Takes them a little longer to get jaded and run down if they think it's for the greater good. Hammershoal keeps going on and on about one of those blue bands too, the one that sees stuff. You might want to set him aside for later. He's been solving cold cases better than unsolved mysteries ever could." Cutter laughed at his own joke, but Ridley only watched the cameras on his eternal vigil. "Not really for me to say," Ridley finally said. "More for the others to speculate when the time comes." "The bigwigs," Cutter replied, and Ridley nodded. "They never save many. Last year they spared none, and I think the most I've ever seen them spare was 2. Ridley shrugged, his bony shoulders coming up from behind the wings of the chair. "They have their ways." The 2 he was talking about had been a couple of white bands that had been able to manipulate the output of whatever they were close to. The power had played hell while they were here, and the kitchen cooks often reported the food they had made coming out in double portions. The 2 students, twin girls, hadn't been tested at finals and had been allowed to go to the world unburnt. They now stayed at a government facility within a nuclear plant, the output of which helped cut the government's bottom line when it came to energy costs. Before that, Ridley couldn't even think of who it had been before that. The twins had been 10 years ago, and no one had been spared after them. 18 is fine for midterm, Cutter, but we need to cut the fat after midterms are over. I want no more than 10 when finals come around. Cutter rasped his facial hair again. I don't think that'll be too difficult. We're about to start combat training in the red band class, and that usually weeds out a few. Green bands generally start burning out about now, if their mental acumen ain't strong. It's the blue bands, I figure, we'll have trouble thinning. There's a couple in there I wish we could keep. The tracker would be hell on wheels for snatching. Ridley turned around, and Cutter stepped back under the weight of that glare. Don't overreach, Cutter. These children are not tools. You know why they're here, and you know what they're meant for. Don't get greedy or stupid. The moment we start keeping them, the moment we stop burning them out and start making a private army, the federal government will burn us to the ground. Cutter nodded. I was just talking, he said, turning to go. Don't pretend it ain't something you've never thought about. Ridley turned back to the monitors, and Cutter left. He had considered it. He had thought about it long and often, but it would ultimately amount to nothing. The federal government would never allow it, but Ridley was pretty sure that if he set his mind to it, he could build a small army of powerful people, and the government would never be the wiser. The problem was the reason that he had taken the children in the first place. They were here to fulfill a purpose. They were his sacrifice and his life's work, and he needed that to continue if the world was to continue. If there was a God, Ridley thought he would understand. If there was a God, Ridley meant to ask him why he had done this in the first place, before he undoubtedly condemned him to hell. Janice was trying to stay cool, but her eyes were constantly roving over the kids in the cafeteria. Ridley had been keeping her too busy to return to base, but as she got some lunch, she realized that 6 months had passed since she was last here. She wondered if he was still alive, her hands shaking as she made her salad, and figured he must be, or she would have heard about it. She had heard about the girl who had had the hemorrhage and the boy who had the peanut allergy, but those had been the only 2 reported deaths. That was rare. She remembered classes that had ripped each other to shreds. Her own class had been halved by midterm, and only the blue bands like her had been spared. By the time finals came around, she had been one of 5 students left, and 4 of them had been blue bands. But that's what happens when your red bands start a coup and have to be put down. She shivered when she heard him, and it took every fiber of her being not to turn around and look at him. He was alive. She watched him in the mirror from behind the bar and saw him and his friends walking to a table near the wall. He was popular, it seemed. Most of the class was sitting with them, and they were all talking animatedly about their classes. A few others were sitting here and there, but Dunstan seemed to be part of the largest of the friend circles. Suddenly, she wanted to talk to him so badly. She wanted to ask him about his day, to see how his studies were going, to tell him how much he looked like her, to tousle his hair, and to tell him how proud of him she was. His smile could have been on any one of her baby pictures. His hair was the same light brown as hers, and she was glad that he hadn't gotten anything from his father, whoever that had been. Then, suddenly, he felt her looking at him and glanced her way. His smile slipped a bit, his eyes revealing a lack of recognition, and she turned away and took her tray to the teacher's area. He hadn't known her. Of course he hadn't. He had never met her. He didn't know who she was. She had never been there for him until he was abducted and dragged to this place. He wouldn't want to know her. And who could blame him? "Jan," someone called, and she looked up to see Wheeler was sitting at a table by himself. She smiled, some of her joy returning. She hadn't seen Wheeler in 5 months, and this sudden appearance was a balm to her wound. She put her salad down across from him, sniffing at the huge burger that he was working his way through. "Better be careful, stud. Those things will catch up with you." Wheeler shrugged. "I'd rather die from a burger than the errant blast of one of these damn kids." Janice nodded, taking a bite as she mulled it over. "What brings you back to the site?" she said, through a mouthful of lettuce. They wanted me to help with the midterms for the red bands. I don't know what, but they get what they want." They chewed, each of them trying to find something to say. "Your observation go well?" she asked, grasping at straws. "Pretty well," he said, wiping his mouth. "We found a few kids the site was interested in, and I don't think they'll be too hard to snatch. You?" Janice nodded. "About the same. One of them is definitely going to be a problem. I haven't seen a pyrokinetic in a while. This one is definitely powerful." Wheeler nodded, slowly. "How was Trask?" he asked, referring to her partner on the mission. "Not a good match. He honestly just sat around and listened to college football on his phone. He wasn't into anything I was reading. He didn't like to talk, and it was very dull." Wheeler nodded again. "Jezzy never shut the hell up. It was just chatter, chatter, chatter. She never wanted to talk about anything besides what she was into. It was a pain." Janice made a sound as she ran her fork through her salad. "I heard she's a popular partner. Supposed to be amazing in bed, they say." Wheeler snorted. "What, you jealous?" "Maybe," Janice hedged. Wheeler laughed. "I never touched her, don't worry. She wanted to, but I've been kinda hung up on someone from work," he said, looking up at her leadingly. Janice sighed, reaching slowly across to squeeze his fingers. "That's too bad. I happen to be a little hung up on a sweet guy from work too, but office romances are pretty frowned upon." He squeezed her fingers back before pulling his hand away. "Well, maybe we'll get paired together again so we can spend some time trying to get over our office flings." Janice smiled, her salad mostly forgotten. "I like that." Dr. Hammarskjöld winced as the door was slammed shut and looked up to find Cutter looming against the door to his office. "I've asked you to knock," the little doctor said, looking back at his computer. "Ridley says he wants to cut the class in half before finals." Hammarskjöld looked up, his eyebrows sliding together. "What?" "Yeah, he wants to go down to 10 before finals. Better get your tight 5 ready, because I think this will be the year I have a red band class with more than 1 at the end." Hammarskjöld made a noise in his throat. "I'll talk to him. If we can get all 18 to graduation, more the better. Why does he—" "Obviously, he wants to breed competition. He doesn't want to graduate 18, little man. He wants to graduate the best. That's what he'll get. We both know the green bands will begin to drop off as they always do. That little girl will probably be fine, but the others, they'll probably start dropping like flies." Hammarskjöld shook his head. "The glee you take in the death of children is truly chilling." Cutter laughed. "Why not? Are they not brought here for a special purpose? Why not let them fulfill it as intended? He left then, thankfully, and Hammershoal rubbed at the bridge of his nose. Midterms were going to be brutal this year. He could already tell. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.